Okay, so today I have the chance to be with Luca Lampariello, which is I think a rather well-known polyglot here on YouTube. It's a great pleasure to be with you here today, Luca. First of all, thank you so much for giving me some of your precious time to allow me to interview you today.
The
Uh,
pleasure is mine, Sam.
so Luca is well known. He speaks around 12 languages, right? You've learned
Yeah.
you speak around
Yes.
12 languages, and he is currently studying interpretation in Paris. So today
hmm
I'm going to be asking Luca a couple of questions that I think a lot of language learners out there have in regards to acquiring a foreign language, and how does he do it? How does he do it so well? And how does he keep his motivation and so on? So are you ready to start?
I'm ready to start.
Okay, so my first question, which is rather broad, is how do you go about learning a language from scratch? Let's say from tomorrow you were to start learning Arabic, for example. What material would you use, books or else? How would you get started? And for somebody who is looking into learning a new language, what kind of advice would you give them for those out there who just don't know where to start?
Okay, so the very first thing that I do is to get hold of a language series I really like. There's a lot of language interesting and valuable language series on the market. I often go for Asimov, which is
Mm-hmm.
I think what I consider a brilliant language series, and I start using that book. My advice is that there's a lot of resources out there, especially after in this internet era. So there's a lot you can actually choose, you can select, you can use. But I normally advise people, I suggest that you use just one language series, two max, that you really like. For example, I normally choose Asimov because uh, it not only adapts to the way I learn languages, but also because I like the visual aspect of that book. I think that using something you like, even visually, is very important in general. But I believe in quality, and I think that Asimov in general is a quality book. What I do is that I choose one language series, as I said, and then I use apply my learning technique to it, which is a very precise technique. I use a back and forth translation. That is, the good thing of Asimov is that it has bilingual text, so I
Right.
can use what I call my mother tongue L1 as a crutch to understand and decipher L2, which is the language I'm learning, and then I first analyze the L2, and then I do this kind of translation towards the language I'm learning. And this is not it's not only important. What you do is important, but it also depends. The time schedule is also very important. Another thing that I really think is important is to work a little bit every day. So a lot of people, for example, think that uh, I spend like 5 or 6 hours on hitting the books, but I just
Right.
spend 30 to 40 minutes, so in small chunks,
Wow.
applying this technique to the language series.
You spend no more than 30 to 40 minutes in the beginning stages of your learning towards
Yes,
learning a language?
I believe in the so-called language path. Everybody can choose a different language path. There's people who spend a lot of time, on the language at the beginning, like I don't know, 5 hours,
Mm-hmm.
4 to 5 hours. For example, there's intensive courses. They go to a school and they spend a lot of time on the language. But the thing is that as an independent language learning, there was nobody telling me what I should do. So I just decided to spend a little bit 30 minutes a day. Well, not only, I would say that sometimes it happens that I also spend a couple hours, 30 minutes in the morning and maybe 30 minutes in the afternoon. What I believe is important, and I also read it in a book which confirmed my beliefs, is that learning in chunks is better. If you spend 4 hours, well, if you have the mental stamina to do that, well, go for it. But the thing is, as far as I'm concerned, even if it might sound a little bit weird, because I'm very passionate about language learning, I do think that spending a little amount of time on something helps you concentrate and focus on what you do much more. So I believe in quality first and quantity later.
Interesting. And like so far, all the languages you've learned, have you had that Asimil course available in those languages?
Well, yeah. English, French, Spanish, and German. No, I just learned English at school, if you can call it learning, because I didn't learn much at school. French I learned at school and mostly by watching television. And then as far as German and Spanish are concerned, I used another language series because I hadn't found out I hadn't figured out that there was such a brilliant language series as Asimil. And then from the other language I learned was the first language I learned with Asimil was Dutch, and from then on I just used Asimil every time I had to start learning a language for every single language I learned.
So basically, if we were to sum up your advice here, that would be to focus on one or two at the most language resources at the beginning, and learn in chunks at the beginning of at the beginner stages of language
Yes, and learn every day. I want to emphasize the fact that as I said, it's a personal choice. You can spend a lot of time you can invest a lot of time in the language, but the main problem is that a lot of people are not willing to invest that time unless they're constantly stimulated, for example, if they go to schools, to a language school. So the problem is that they run the risk of burning out. One problem that I find is pretty big is that there's a lot of people trying to tackle 3, 4, 5 languages at the same time, investing a lot of time, and they seriously run the risk of burning out and giving up, because that's I think that the beginning of the path. The first part of the path is kind of delicate, is the most complicated, because it's easy to give up. Like when you start working out and you start jogging, at the beginning you find it very difficult because you're not used to it. But once you get going, it gets easier. So at the beginning you have to do a little bit and then move on. That's what I
would
believe.
discourage people from learning more than one language at the same time.
Yeah, well, you can always learn a lot of languages at the same time, and you have to, the more languages you learn, the more complicated it gets to organize your time schedule. You have to put more effort into it. So, yeah, basically, it would be better to learn one language at a time. But if you want to go for a lot of languages, please do.
As long as you can keep up the motivation and so forth. Yeah.
Exactly.
Great. Second question here is something I've been pondering about for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. It's the issue of setting goals. A lot of people say that without goals, it's kind of like just going blindly into learning something, and that goals, it's something that is very, very important. And I'd like to know your opinion about that. How important do you think setting goals is in language learning?
I think that setting goals plays a huge role in language learning, because if your goals are vague, then you don't know where you're going. Well, if you know where you're going, if you have an objective, you know exactly where you're going. If you already learned a language, you know that you have to go through a lot of phases. I basically divide the whole language learning process. You never end the learning, but in general, there's like 3 stages, like the beginning phase, the intermediate, and then the advanced. So if you have a general picture, it might help you to figure out what you have to do and what goals you want to accomplish and to reach in a certain amount of time. So, for example, if you're a beginner and you want to reach an intermediate phase or intermediate stage, whatever you want to call it, what you should do is, for example, tell yourself, now I'm going to use the first language series. Then once you have finished the first book, you can add something else. And another thing that is very important is, people ask you, when do I figure out where I am? Am I intermediate? Am I a beginner? I think that You figure out that, for example, you're past the beginner phase when the same content that you've been using for like 3 months, 4 months gets boring and gets too easy. So when something gets too easy or gets boring, it's time to move on. It's time to do something else. I always emphasize the fact that, varying your work is very important. There's a lot of people who say, I abide by this kind of learning. I really like, for example, listening and reading, and that's absolutely fantastic because the input is important in language learning. But what I do generally is I try to vary my work so that I work in all areas of the language. Like listening and reading is very important. It's a conditio sine qua non. It's a necessary but not sufficient condition as far as I'm concerned, because I like playing with the language since the very beginning. So I like activating some areas in my brain. This doesn't necessarily mean that you have to speak. You have to talk to native speakers. Get out there and talk. It means that you can do something else. You have other techniques to develop what you're learning. So input, you transform it. I do this by translating, but you can talk to yourself, for example. You can do other exercises. You can read out loud. So vary your work is very important. So getting back to what I was saying before, it's having goals, short-term and long-term goals is very important. If you already learned a language, you probably know what these goals are. If you've never learned a language, you can actually establish kind of boundaries. For example, you can tell yourself, well, in the beginning phase, I'm going to use just one book, maybe two, if you like having other materials. And once you finish the book, you're going to do something else. You're going to tell yourself that phase one is over, and you may coincide with the decimal series or whatever, teach yourself, whatever, colloquial, and then you move on. It means that you're going to change your strategy. Having the same strategy all over the process of language learning is not a good thing. So you have to change things because things get boring over time.
Right, we had been talking a little bit before about that, and what you told me was, as you said, at the beginning stages, you focus on one or two resources, and once you hit that intermediate stage, you told me that then you start to vary the kind of material you're dealing with. Is that right?
Yes, that's absolutely right. The main difference is that the level of autonomy that you have when you start learning a language is not very high. It means that you have to rely on books that explain things to you. While when you enter the so-called intermediate phase, you are a little bit more independent, and you can learn you can choose the material. The difference is that the internet makes it possible to go out there and to get hold of a lot of interesting resources. If you have like some taste, if you have certain interests, the internet allows you to choose to go there and say, look, I like geography, I like history, I want to learn about anything, any topic. And that's great, because when you're interested in something, your desire to understand what you're reading, what you're listening is very high. So you will put more effort and more enthusiasm into language learning and acquiring the content that you are exposed to. So you're being exposed to. So that's a big difference. That means that at the beginning you're resorting to material that imposes content on you, on your tastes, while in the intermediate phase, you decide what you want to learn, and that makes a huge difference. And the internet makes it possible to choose whatever you want if you can look for it, if you know how to find it.
And you can start to actually, learn the language through material that is geared towards native speakers. For example, news or blogs, that type of stuff.
Exactly, and the most amazing thing is that you can create your own material. For example, in many languages, the example of Chinese comes to mind. There's an amazing site which is called Mandarin Spot. You can actually you can select a text in Chinese, you can put it into Mandarin Spot, and it gives you the whole pinyin, and it gives you all the words, all the dictionary automatically. You can print it, so that changes things. So you can go to a website, select an article that you like, put it in Mandarin spot, and create a version that explains everything to you. And as you know, we can only learn what we can understand. So we make sure not only can we can create material that we like, but we can also understand it thanks to these tools. The example of Chinese comes to mind. There's other examples like in Russian or any other language. You can put it in Google Translate. Some languages, in the case of Japanese, that's very difficult to understand the translation because the syntax is completely different. And I suppose that's the same thing for Korean. But for a lot of languages like Spanish, Italian, English, Spanish, English, Italian, so European languages that have a similar structure, that makes it very easy to create a rough translation. Having bilingual text is very useful to have a reference. It doesn't have to be precise, but it gives you a general idea what a sentence means. And working in sentences and in messages, so you see the same message transmitted in two languages, helps you a lot to understand the text of the language you're learning.
Great. So basically, just to sum it all up, goals are really important. They are crucial to success, right?
Absolutely.